That was crazy.
Speaking of going the other way, welcome to the 4th season of the Exhaust Notes podcast. Nick, sorry, I jumped in.
We are already... Go for it, man. We are already off on the right foot.
I think young Daniel, I almost pronounced that an incorrect way. That would have gotten all of us canceled.
No, you're allowed to say it now, because Bad Orange Man is in the office, so...
I'm doubling down. One of the panelists on the panel today is going by Daniel Retirado.
Retirado.
Like I said, not going to say it because I just know that my retirado self would pronounce it the way it was not to be pronounced.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So how's the winter break been for you, fine gentlemen?
Besides, sunning my junk in Greece for the last 2 months. No, I didn't. I have kids. What are we talking about here? I feigned interest in other sports for a time being and then waited patiently for this day to come back.
So are you going on record and saying that you're not allowed to sun your junk if you have kids? Because I haven't had kids yet, and Rohit and I were just talking pre-game to this episode. Does that... Maybe that changes my whole perspective on kids, if I'm being honest.
I don't think it does.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, can we call the pregame meeting to this quali? So that way...
Yeah,
the qualies.
Yeah, quali.
Yeah, so we were talking in quali about sunning our junk.
Yeah,
wasn't that a meme where people were just putting their butts up against the sky and it's just...
We should actually do quali and put it on the Patreon so people can see us really let loose, since clearly we don't get crazy enough.
We're so rigid and restricted in the quali portion of this, listener, that you probably wouldn't want to be a Patreon if you actually saw how ham and ham in the way of just being incredibly cheesy. And I say all of this because recently your boy got selected to be a part of a Nike corporate video, and my goal in life now is to do one of these corporate videos where I don't look like I'm in a hostage negotiation situation. And I don't mean that as the terrorist holding the hostage, because aesthetically, look at your boy, people are going to make that leap because, as Todd said, we're in a specific time of year now. No, but I look like the actual hostage, and the best way I can describe it is it's a combination of Ricky Bobby, where I'm like, what do I do with my hands? And then your favorite local athlete sporting commercial, like dealership commercial, that's the level of insight that only I can provide whenever the cameras are on in a corporate setting.
Still pushing the Chevy Blazer 30 years later.
Hey, everybody.
Because you played on the championship team in 1954.
Mm-hmm.
This Chevy Blazer has all-wheel drive.
I love my roll-up windows in this Chevy Blazer.
The only thing I love rolling up more is product from my dispensary.
Right? Yeah. Exactly.
That's way too woke. Was a good old-fashioned Marlboro Red.
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, we are a Formula One podcast, in case we didn't get to that in the first 3 minutes of recording. But
oh yeah, we're doing that. Aren't we?
Marlboro Red does kind of align with where we're headed here. And honestly, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves with this episode, because we got a lot of things to discuss, and just to bring it back and get back in the swing of things. But I guess get back in gear would be a better analogy there. But I do think that if there were an evil villain equivalent to what we're experiencing in America right now in the Formula One world, his name would be Flavio Briatore, and he would be probably smoking Marlboro Reds.
Nah, he's too classy for that. He would have
players.
No, that dude is the epitome of a Zin can come to life, and I don't even know if Zin can is the appropriate form of unit of Zin.
Yeah.
I mean,
honestly, I hear the rage is I hear all the billionaires are ketamine users at this point, so maybe they've just figured out a way to roll that up and smoke it at their dispensaries.
Back in my day, I would have loved if billionaires, because they shouldn't really have that much money, but if they're gonna have that much money, they should utilize it to bring back obscure brands. And listeners, here's my annual mention of the brand Zima. What if Zima was the official nectar of choice for billionaires, and they single-handedly...
Could you imagine a Zima livery? Oh, yeah.
It would remind me of those phones in the 90s where it was just a clear coating and then you could see all the wires and stuff inside the car.
I mean, I do feel like that the other side of that, the less adult side of that would be like Crystal Pepsi.
Yeah.
And you just have an entirely transparent car.
You guys are just making me depressed for all the things that we're missing now. Crystal Pepsi was glorious when I was like 7. And Zima was like the coolest drink ever in high school.
Listeners, if you ever mix Crystal Pepsi with Zima, please don't
let us know.
Don't write us a review. Seek professional help.
Tell us what size your ulcer is now.
Yeah. Now, I just want to respond to Todd's comment and be like, what was life like during the Surge Wars of 96, Grandpa?
Surge Wars. Jeez.
Oh, man. That was Surge. Wow. That's
All right, this segment of Memba Berries was brought to you by our favorite soft drinks and hard drinks of the early 1990s. But like Nick mentioned, for some of you, this may be your very first episode, and for that, we apologize. But really, we are a Formula One podcast that sometimes doesn't talk about Formula One. And I am one of 3 esteemed guest panelists, God, it's been that long, listener, that we have now referred to ourselves as guest panelists. I think the proper term is co-host. I'm Rohit Malhotra. Alongside me, I've got Nick Engvall, and then the people's champ, OnlyFans #1 OnlyFan, Todd Yates. How are we?
I think we're good.
I can't believe you just wrote my real name. How are you, Nick?
I gave all of our government names. Do you think I'm going to go down on this ship alone? I'm this close to putting out social security numbers out there, too.
Well,
I mean, they're already out there thanks to, never mind. Let's not.
Nope.
Let's
there
try
won't
to
be any money left for that.
unpolitical.
Anyway, yeah.
Yep.
They've already drained all of that.
Guys, we are a week away from the first race. Like, how are we feeling about this? So do we want to start off with preseason, or do we want to get more of these Jack Handy deep thoughts out in the world?
Deep thoughts. I mean, did you guys... There was kind of a lot that happened in the offseason, but also kind of it, I guess, came to pass being meaningless a little bit.
Yeah. I think we should just quickly run through who's on what team.
Perfect.
Just for the new listeners. Also, I was thinking about one thing before we get into that. We usually start with something along the lines of your new favorite Formula One podcast or favorite Formula One podcast, favorite podcast. I think we should actually just refer to ourselves as like the drive to survive for those who are barely surviving.
Yeah.
Or barely hanging on.
It's apparently a rich man's sport. We're here to provide you a middle class look at it. That's the best way I would describe it.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
We are in a world full of Banana Republic. We're very gap heavy, and that's also done on purpose because that's a racing term. If you didn't know.
Oh man! All right, so let's actually look through this. Unless
I've got the grid
unless you
up.
guys think you want to run through them.
Right. So what we're going to do, listener, is we'll go through the grid top to bottom. So up first we have Red Bull in the #1 race car. We have Max Verstappen, arguably the #1 driver of this current era. And alongside him, I think it's safe to say we can call Liam Lawson, a.k.a. number 30, an unproven commodity. What do you guys make of this potential partnership? Because all I can say is this, to me, furthers Red Bull's plan of trying to win the Constructors with just one competent driver, and then whatever the second driver gives you is icing on the cake.
I tend to agree. What did he get? Maybe 9 or 10 starts, 9 or 10 races last season?
I think he's got 11 total starts.
11 total.
From his 2 times filling in.
Yeah, I think the bar is set very low for that second Red Bull seat. But that also means there's tons of opportunity for this next generation. So
it can't be like think about it logistically. Like it can't be worse than Sergio, right? Like that man, and I still think he had his moments of greatness, like that 20th to 1st in Sakir a couple 3 years ago, whatever it was. But like he was so mentally broken by the end of his career that like you could have put another Max in that car and it wouldn't have like done anything, right? He was so distraught. There was just no helping him. So with Lawson coming in basically as a rookie, because he hasn't done a full season, I'll call him a rookie still. Like, it's only upside, right? Even if he's 10th every race, that's still
24 points, 23 points.
Whatever. Like, that's still about on par of Sergio. So if he gets a couple of odd podiums, that's upside to me.
You just unlocked something in my mind of, if we had a Formula One grid that consisted entirely of teams' number one drivers in both spots, who would win that? Because I don't think it would be Red Bull, because I think the two Maxes would take each other out.
That's a really good question.
That's a very Severance-style question.
Yeah, it'd have to be Lando, though, right? He's got just enough fear in him still to not push the way Max does, but he's got enough skill to navigate dealing with himself.
So, speaking of Lando,
in this
we'll
hypothetical, I'm not talking about that in the real world. In the real world, he's got a lot of mental stuff to get past to become a champion.
I mean, we all do. I mean, and if listener, we would be remiss to not remind you that we are foremost a mental health podcast more than we are anything else. So that way, if you ever feel bad about your mental health, you can still listen to the three of us wax poetic and just feel better about your life, because why would you want to talk about Formula One to us?
Or just start drinking heavily.
Yeah. Zima is very popular.
That's exactly what I was just going to say.
All right. Well, Nick did mention Lando Norris, so we'll use this as an opportunity to go to the constructors' winning McLaren team, where we've got Lando Norris in the number 4 car and Oscar Piastri in the number 81 car. Todd, I'll defer to you in this one because we let Nick go first. What is your thought as co-captain of the Team Papaya fan club here on the Exhaust Notes podcast?
Oh, man. I actually think that Oscar's going to have himself a year, and that could start to get in the way of the prince that was promised, Lando, being the World Drivers' Champion. I think the one thing that we probably saw a bunch last year is maybe some strategy troubles from McLaren in certain situations. Actually, probably more than a few times, which lost them some points in the battle for the Drivers' Championship last year. I think I'm hoping that they have that figured out, and I hope that I hope Oscar has a good season also, but I hope Lando's really learned from last year and ready to become the alpha.
Speaking of alpha, Nick Engvall, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I hope that Lando gets his championship this year. I do think that, to Todd's point, he's on the edge of missing the opportunity completely, and I feel like if he doesn't come out like in the front of the first handful of races and really kind of show that he's the one to beat this year, then I don't want to wish it upon him. But I feel like that's kind of a Danny Rick moment again, where it's like you've had so much pressure on you to win for all these years, and the cars have proven to be winning cars. But now you've got Oscar, who potentially could, push you out of that number one spot on the team. And if that happens, who knows if there's even an opportunity for him to. I don't think he's leaving McLaren by any means, but it would be really difficult for him to get past Oscar winning a title before him, in my opinion.
So I was going to do this because this segment kind of just came into existence in thin air as we were chatting. So I'll try to come up with one big question for each one of these teams. In McLaren's case, I have two big questions, and you both kind of alluded to them. If given the option, would McLaren rather win a constructor's title this year or a driver's title for Lando? And then conversely, based on how you answer that, could that cause Oscar to leave?
I think McLaren or any team would rather win the World Drivers' Championship. That's the one that's remembered. No one really cares about the Constructors' Championship, with the exception or the caveat to that being like Mercedes winning 8 in a row or Red Bull's 4 in a row.
Just only, that's an accountant stat, right? Like you're only wanting that for the money in the bank account, basically, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
I think the interesting thing about that question, though, take it a little bit further. with as competitive as Lando and Oscar were last year in those McLaren cars, if those cars are up to speed this year with what they were last year, I do not think that either of those guys can win a championship without McLaren winning the Constructors.
So we're not going to have a repeat of last year where we'll have a different constructors winner than we did a drivers winner. And I mean, this is one of those things that I keep meaning to look up, but I have a life listener, and that's just full of drinking a lot of Zimas and playing with my daughter. And that's not true because I don't drink. But how many times can you guys remember off the top of your head a difference in championship like that? Because I don't think that's necessarily quite a normal occurrence. It almost seems like the opposite, like it's almost a shooting star of an occurrence where you have a different driver's winner than you did the constructor.
I think it's actually probably common, right? Like, okay. I don't know if it's common, but it's like probably a 50-50 split. Wouldn't you say, Todd?
Yeah, I would say like probably 60-40, or like 60% of the time being that we have the same driver's champion with a constructor as the same team. But it is pretty common. Like the Max's first championship, Mercedes still won the constructors. The only one I would say the anomaly there is that 8-year run by Mercedes, because before that it was Seb had it, but I think one of Seb's years, maybe the first year they didn't win the constructors.
Yeah.
So I just looked this up. The Formula One's Drivers and Constructors Championships have been different 12 times since the Constructors Championship began in 1958.
Wow.
Oh, okay. Then we're totally wrong.
That's rare. Yeah.
That's what, like 10%, 15% of the time?
Yep. So I mean, it's just something.
Has to be the exact. It has to be the exact season that Max had, though, right? It has to be a dominant driver and really two or three other competitors really competitive with each other behind that dominant driver. And not to say that Max was even I think Max was the dominant driver for the first half of the season, and then it was kind of up in the air for the last 8 to 10 races. And I think that's where I think this year is going to be much different. I think that there's so much confidence behind that for McLaren, and there's so much excitement for Ferrari, which we'll get into, that inevitably those two teams will be like competitive, in my opinion.
No, but to your point as well, guys, I'm kind of going through the timeline, and it seems like this was a phenomenon that was really relevant in the 80s, because I see in 81, 82, 83, and 86 that this exact premise that I came you guys up with happened, and then we also saw it in 94. So it seems like it's more of a modern phenomenon than a historical one. So maybe that's why that kind of probably impacted your perception of it. But I always find that fascinating, because to your point, Nick, we've essentially seen Red Bull give up having a second driver mean anything other than a space filler, like literally a professional space filler like you would see in the Oscars this weekend whenever the entire class of Conclave has gone to a bathroom. I don't know why Conclave was the movie that stuck out in my head, but good movie. Worth checking out. Speaking of checking out and dominant drivers, I'm going to use this to talk about what I think is the most interesting team on the grid this year, which is that prancing horse Ferrari Scuderia, where we've got number 16 Charles Leclerc, but more importantly, number 44, but number 1 in our hearts, Team LH's own Lewis Hamilton. Am I wrong to think that this season, in terms of how we're going to enjoy it, falls primarily on Ferrari's ability to be a competent team? Or are we also just going to laugh at how silly they are? As the resident Scuderia Ferrari fanboy, I'm ready to go either way. But what do you guys think?
Can we just start by talking about that horrible new sponsorship and how it's ruining the aesthetics of Ferrari in general?
You mean the 9-time HP? Like, I was going to go full Booker T, and then I realized that's a lot saying something 9 times in a row, so I think I stopped at a gentleman's 4.
It's so brutal. Like, the team kit, the car, it feels like the whole, just because it's in my head from recent, the band commercial, MJ, like the band shoe, whatever. It's like the absolute antithesis of that. It's like, here's a beautiful car, big white block on it. Like, it's just the absolute. It's so bad. Am I overreacting here? You guys feel like it's?
I mean, I'm not a fan of it. I think look, it's Ferrari. It's supposed to be red. You're supposed to have a little bit of yellow on it. And outside of that, you shouldn't really mess with that. It's kind of, I don't know.
I didn't think it was that big of a deal until I read the internet's review of it. And now I kind of see it. And then selfishly, I just got the pre-order, like I'm sure the other Lego aficionado on the panel did, about my Ferrari set coming in fairly soon. And I am so happy that HP is nowhere near that set, because I don't think I would have bought it. So maybe that's really my true way of looking at it. But going into this, enough of the Lego talk. Can I ask you guys a simple question? And maybe this might be my deceptively deep question about this team. Who is the number one driver on this team?
I'm going to let Todd take that one.
I think it's sad to say for Chuck's sake, but if you have a 7-time world champion come into the team, it doesn't matter. You're the second driver. Like, I know that he's like the prodigal son of Monaco, like he has the Italian roots, everything. I think he is unfortunately in Lewis's shadow until he proves otherwise. Like, we've seen him have moments of greatness. He finally got redemption in Monaco, like things like that. But he's also just like completely shit the bed on many occasions and crumbled mentally. So until he can prove to himself and the public, I guess, that he can not only withstand the pressure of being in the Scuderia, but also going up against one of the best drivers of all time, he's a second driver.
But I think that's actually an advantage. I think this is, it takes pressure off of him, right? Like, the problem with Leclerc last year, or last few years, has been that Carlos Sainz was questionably, like, arguably the better driver a majority of the time. And being that there's so much of that, it's kind of like Lando with McLaren, right? Like, we've expected Lando to win even before Oscar Piastri was around. We expected Leclerc to win for at least the last 4 years, right? So, like, or maybe not win a title, but, like, definitely be winning races, because there's added pressure that comes with being in a Ferrari to begin with. With Lewis, to Todd's point, like, you know, the only other driver to have 7 titles is a former Ferrari driver with Michael Schumacher. So, like, there's so much pressure on Lewis to not only get his 8th title, but like to prove himself in another car, since he's been with Mercedes for so long. And I think that will ultimately take a lot of the pressure off of Leclerc that, you know, we don't really see it talked about as much. And I hope that means that both of them are more competitive, but who knows? It's going to be really interesting, because I think the other part of Ferrari obviously is, you know, the strategy and the decisions that have been made over the last couple of years have most people questioning if they can get back to that level of greatness that, like, is just completely expected from them in any form of racing.
That might be the most poignant thing that's been said in this episode. So I think we need to quickly go into the madcap silliness that we're known for.
Cheers to Zima for that one.
Yeah. Is that street legal in 25?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny as well, because I think one of the other questions I was going to ask you, Nick, as you were talking about Lewis, is, let's say Lewis somehow wins the 8th title. Compare and contrast that to if he doesn't. Like, to me, it seems like his legacy is set. He is going to be, at worst, the second best driver of all time. But if he does manage to get that 8th with Ferrari, I think that is the biggest cherry on a Sunday anybody can have, because now he's been able to prove that he can do it in multiple places, and this is going to sound cynical in a sense, but he's also been able to do it at the most important place it is to win. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. Like, we would all sit here and say that we expect Max to win 5-10 titles because of his age, because of his skill set, because of where he's at right now. But we would also, if you jump back 10-15 years, you would have thought the same thing about Seb, you know, early on in his career. And I think, you know, you have to have, that's like the thing that always brings me back to racing, is like, you have to have the perfect team, the perfect driver, the perfect car. There's so many elements to this. It's not like any other sport in the world where, you know, let's go to basketball. Like, you know, if we look at, you know, the Lakers, LeBron can't carry the team by himself at his age. But previously, we watched LeBron carry a team that had no business being in the finals. Like, no business being in the finals. Where now we can, like with racing, like you have to have the perfect combination of things in order to beat the teams that are out there, because there's so many, great drivers, great teams, and like the engineers behind the scenes for all these cars are just so advanced compared to what they used to be, that like it's so competitive. And I think, to me, like, I expect Lewis to get an 8th title. I think, I don't think that. I mean, I'm a little biased, because I think that the same way that I recently probably dropped a hot take on sneaker history and said that LeBron is better than Jordan. Like, I grew up watching Jordan. There's no denying how amazing that man was. He made me want everything in life. Basketball, earrings, Gatorade, it didn't matter, right? Like, he was the guy that you wanted to be like. And my real idol is Allen Iverson, who was like closer to me in age, but also like more relatable to me because he wasn't as polished as Michael Jordan, or as, reserved.
His affinity for burritos as well.
Probably, yes. And I think that's the thing, though. Like, like you get to see who a person is off the track, and then it's like, okay, and this person does this incredible feat in the sport that they're in. And to me, like, Lewis will always be like the greatest, because I just don't see, I don't see somebody taking the sport and introducing it to people that were shunned and pushed out of the sport in years past. His whole lifestyle and his whole, belief system, and the not drinking thing, and starting his own non-alcoholic thing, like all these things are a piece of what he represents that is much bigger than racing. But it's cool that someone like that is also a diehard racer, right? It's kind of like Seb, Seb being like, this like very diehard environmentalist, but like pushing the sport to new areas because of that is like a beautiful thing. And I think for me, I'm measuring the man more than I am just the race car driver. So like, it's hard to imagine anybody even coming close to what Lewis has meant for the sport. There's absolutely more people paying attention to Formula One now than there was, in Lewis's first few years in F1.
It's like Tiger at golf. Like,
absolutely,
that was the step that Formula One took. When same thing when Tiger started winning, it was the Earth's eyes were on golf because of him.
Yeah,
same
exactly.
things happen with,
and I think that's such a powerful thing, and it happens in so many different ways. But like to have, going back to basketball, right? You kind of have that with Joker and with Luka, and like you have this element of like bringing back the world to the game of basketball with them and their success. But even those guys they're doing a fraction of what someone like Lewis or Tiger does on a global scale of bringing people to the sport. Like, people are literally learning about Formula One, and Netflix can create a documentary about Formula One because Lewis is the jumping off point of this new generation. And then, like, not to take away from the guys like Max who are out there, pushing Lewis to the limits and racing. Like, you have to have that perfect storm on that side of things too. And I just think that's such a cool thing. So for me, like, it's really hard to like imagine not rooting for Lewis to get his 8th win with Ferrari. But I also think that he'll be with Ferrari for a handful more years, because eventually you'll see that tip to say that Charles Leclerc is the number one driver. But that doesn't mean Lewis isn't going to be competitive, right? It's going to be just like, sorry, I'm drawing a blank. Kamoa.
Fernando Alonso.
Yeah, just like Fernando, right? Like, he's gonna drive until he just absolutely doesn't want to drive anymore, because he's that skilled behind the wheel, and it's just a matter of like the right time and the right place and the conditions that mean, oh, cool, I'm going to add another win to my 20-year racing legacy.
Speaking of legacies, the next team we're going to profile is one that is probably going to be, whether it's fairly or unfairly, still judged by their Hamilton inclusion, and that's Mercedes. And we've got George Russell, Todd's probably favorite driver, not named Lance Stroll. And then, arguably to me, the biggest question mark / exclamation point of the grid this year, one Andrea Kimi Antonelli, number 12. Is it wrong to assume that this young man, who I believe is only 17 years old, has the most arduous task of replacing a legend in modern Formula One history? Or could you guys think of a scenario where somebody else had an even greater amount of pressure associated with their maiden year?
I don't even think it's registering for him. I feel like he is an overexcited child that's had too much sugar, and his results on the track this year are going to be either winning or sliding across the finish line backwards on fire. Like, it's going to be those two extremes.
So you're telling me I get Ricky Bobby
Yeah,
on Formula One grid?
You just got a mini Ricky Bobby. Young Kimmy, who will be known as Young Kimmy for the rest of the year, shows so much promise, but I think he is so raw that it's just absolute speed or flames. That's what we're going to see.
I'm just excited about the fact that Yuki Tsunoda, a member of the RB team that we'll talk about later, gets to be a big brother figure to somebody on the grid, at least career-wise. Because I can see Yuki finally having that moment of maturity where you're like, hey, man, that guy's doing too much. Like, I think I'm doing too much. Like, that dude's doing too much. Nick, what do you make of Kimi? And more importantly, are we still forgetting about probably the biggest middle child syndrome haver in Formula One, which is George Russell, which he can't do anything to get anybody's attention other than just being Jan Brady and being like the worst?
I mean,
sure,
yeah,
Jan.
like...
Don't make me the Jan. Everybody knows I'm Cindy. If there's a Jan on this panel, it's you.
No, I think Todd's spot on with Kimi. I think that, to some extent, that's how all these guys are when they come into racing, right? Like, we talked about Max in his early years, which is the same as Seb in his early years, same as Lewis in his early years. Like, all these guys come in hot. They come in very, very hot. And then they learn, like, oh, I just made an enemy with, like, the guys that will, inevitably be my teammates in 2 or 3 years, or be a driving, whatever, consultant on a team in a few years. I think that's also, like, the wild card in that is kind of the excitement, right? Like, George is, I hate to pick on him, but, like, he's just like your average guy, like he kind of looks like the guy that was handed everything. And Kimi kind of seems like the kid that sat in the back of the class and was a little bit of a Kendrick Lamar, like twiddling his thumbs and throwing pencils into the ceiling.
I get more Tweak vibes from Kimi, like from South Park, where he's just like,
Yep,
oh yeah.
But
like,
George
you know
is
what I mean?
missionary
Like,
position. That's what he is.
Which goes perfectly with how raw you said Kimi was. So if there's ever a team that's going to teach you about sex ed, listener, it's going to be the Mercedes team.
Exactly.
Yep. Sorry to interrupt. You were probably going on to make a great point. I just had to get that out there because that came to my brain, and I was like, wait, that's true. I've been calling him a hall monitor this entire time. George is missionary position. It's great. It's fun. Like, right? It's a good time. But there's so many other better ways to do it.
I can only go off of my two mentors in life and now in sex as well. Thank you, Daniel. And thank you, Nick. I will say this. I was just going to say George Russell has the most punchable face this side of Tucker Carlson, but I think you guys are kind of spot on. So we're going to stop this George Russell roast and move on to the team that I think might be the biggest wild card on the grid, and that is the newly formed Williams team. Because the one thing that comes to my mind is this the most balanced driver pairing on the grid, in the sense that either one of them could win a podium and would not startle us in a way, because they're both very professional. They're both very complimentary drivers. And the question I have is, this might be the first Formula One team I can think of where there may not be any single conflict between the two. Can you guys believe that there would be such a driver utopia, or am I just high off my own supply of Zima?
Go ahead, Todd.
This one's an interesting one for me, because I really agree with what you're alluding to, Ro. Like, think about when there was some team calls in Ferrari in the past year, and you just hear Carlos on the radio and be like, no, that's not fair, no, like, or even when he got that penalty and he was like, his like big outburst was like, no, that's not fair, no. That was it. That was, and then he just went on and just like was old reliable. I totally agree that like we're not going to see any flashes here. I don't think we'll see any dust ups between the teammates. But like I think they're the dark horse to also be best of the rest. Like everything I'm hearing about them, the pace in testing so far, it sounds like they've taken a serious step up, and not only like in the way the teams run with James Vowles there now, and like the new staff that they have, but like they have a title sponsor now. Like they are so far removed from like sorry Claire Williams, but like her era when like of the death of the old Williams team. It's crazy to see, and I'm really excited for them. But I think you're right. They may like grab an odd podium here or there, but we're not going to see them setting the track on fire or each other for that matter.
Nick, under,
which is an improvement that's an improvement from the last few years. So, not setting.
Nick, I was going to ask you over under 2.5 podiums for this Williams team.
I think they could. I think I'm going to go over. I think they'll end up with 4 or 5. I think that to Todd's point, like it's a big shift of energy with all of them, right? And you know that Carlos is capable. You know that Alex Albon is capable. Like the cars have been maybe slightly below capable in the last 4 or 5 years, but like last year seemed like the cars were pretty good. But Alex was the only one that really kind of brought anything to the table on the track, and I think that is going to be the case. But now you have Alex with a competitive driver in a seat next to him. He hasn't had that in a long time, you know. And the last time that's Red Bull basically. And didn't he get?
What would you? Because remind me, and maybe I'm off on this. There was a little bit of Russell overlap with Alex, was there not?
Was there?
There might, yeah. Wasn't there 1 year?
Because I thought that was the year where was it?
Russell, that was the year he joined, right? He took a year off for DTM, and then Albano came back, and George was the number one.
And like I said, from a Williams perspective, they're all merging into one big mediocre year with occasional flashes of brilliance. Yeah. But I think I'm going to sound like the broken record that I am. I agree with you too. Like I would be very shocked if we are not speaking about Williams in that 5th to 6th range, because they just have potential. They have goodwill. And if I was a shit stir, which I am, I only wish that somehow Gunther Steiner could manage this team, because that's the only way I could see it go off the rails.
He should just be their marketing manager. He doesn't let James Vowles do the professional thing.
Well, see, it's funny you mention that, because I feel like that's an untapped market for job creation, where it's like if you're a professional sports team, you should have a public-facing coach and you should have a private-facing coach. And Gunther Steiner was born to be a public-facing coach. Like he can win every press conference you put him in. He's not going to win you the game, though.
I mean, he was the highlight of the new Drive to Survive trailer at the very
When is
end,
he not the highlight?
Yeah,
that's true.
Like I feel
he's really taken over the role from Danny Rick being like the focus, the comedic relief, and now he is Drive to Survive.
I mean, I still say that I would happily pay for a him and Matteo Bonata in tiny cars, traveling through
drinking even tinier lattes with their pinkies up.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of pinkies up, actually, I don't know how the hell I'm going to make this segue other than if you throw the pinky up, you also throw the other hand up, and that's to rock. And there's one man that knows how to rock and only how to rock, and that's Fernando Alonso and the Aston Martin team. You know how we talk about a one-man team? I feel like this is the other example of this on the grid. How many points do you think Fernando Alonso is going to not gain this year in his own mind? Because
he's already written off 300 points for the year.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, he just has a big number written in a padded cell, and then every time he can actually take that number down, he will scratch it and make it a new total. But to your point, whatever the maximum number of points a driver can get in a season, Fernando Alonso's already won the title this year with that. It's just a question of, will the math at the end of the year? But I've filibustered long enough. Really, listener, you're here for one reason and one reason only, and that's for Daniel. Say it again for me, Todd, because I'm not going to get canceled.
Retirdo.
What is your best Lance Stroll punchline that you're going to come up with this year?
I don't know. It's got to be in the moment. I can't do it. I can't project.
Can't be put on the spot.
He's probably going to drive into somebody. He'll probably like crash in the pit lane. He'll probably do whatever. But he'll probably also have like the odd good wet race where he's like ends up in like third or fourth, right? Like, it's funny because I'm like both super uninterested about what they do this year because I feel like it's a bit of a write-off year for them because they have Honda coming in and obviously Adrian Newey, but Adrian Newey doesn't start until like I think tomorrow. I think it's either March 1st or March 6th. He wasn't allowed to start with the team until then. So this first half of the year, I'm so uninterested about what they do. They're going to be, middle pack, probably back into the middle pack, just trundling around. Lance Stroll crash into somebody. Actually, Fernando will probably get like one race where he gains 10 places on the start from going all the way around the outside in the grass, whatever.
Well,
and
also,
like that'll be the two headlines we have for the first half of the year.
Fernando Alonso is going to provide director's commentary on Lance's race while he's still racing. Like, I would have done this. Like that's my secret hope for them this year. Because to your point, Fernando's going to do well, better than probably any of us anticipate because he is still Fernando Alonso, El Matador. And then whatever the Canadian equivalent of a matador is, I guess the actual bull, like maybe a beaver. Like maybe that's the Canadian national animal is the beaver. Like AI people, like, because I know we've got a very eclectic and intelligent fan base. If somebody can make an AI version of Fernando Alonso as a matador, like doing the ole, but then have it be instead of a bull, like a Canadian beaver with Lance Stroll's face, maybe we can make that the cover art for this episode or a future episode. Who's to say?
I mean, I think as three Americans commenting on Formula One, we have like the shining example of nepotism in our government right now, so we might as well just acknowledge that that's the only reason that poor Lance is still in a seat. And I do not hate the guy near as much as Todd. I think he's actually a almost competent driver.
Hey,
no, I don't. I don't hate Lance Stroll. I just hate that it's such wasted potential. It's just such wasted potential. I don't hate Lance Stroll. I think Lance Stroll's probably a great guy. He's probably go get lunch with him, go get a beer with him, whatever. Take a ride on his seventh super yacht.
So you can ogle his girlfriend. That's why you want to hang out with him.
Okay, she's a smoke show. Whatever. Easy on the eyes. I'm sure he's totally fine. He just is a bit of a retirdo in a race car.
Weird. Sir, all I can say is
he does retire early a lot.
He does. And he always...
Thanks for the save.
Retirdo. What up with that, Doe?
Mm-hmm.
No, it's one of those things where, listener, we have 3 years of back catalog about how much Todd hates it. So I'm going to push back a little and say that man is so anti-Canadian, you could call him Kendrick Lamar, the way he dislikes that one.
I'm anti-Canadian? No. No.
I'm going to start calling you King Kendrick.
I think it is very specific to Lance Stroll, but honestly, we should get Trevor back on to do like a dissertation on how many times Todd has shat on Lance Stroll. Be a whole episode.
He would just put the Four Nations face-off in my face and say, Canada's still the king at hockey, while I cry gently in the corner. And we'll just move on from there.
That's okay. Moving on from there, let's go to Nick Engvall's spiritual son, Yuki Tsunoda, and the newly christened RB team. Nick, what is your expectation for Yuki? Because if there's one person I think is a sentimental favorite of yours to get a podium this year, it would be the aforementioned Senor Tsunoda. I don't know why I said Senor, although that has a nice alliteration to it, Senor Tsunoda.
It does. I definitely think like it would be nice to see Yuki on the podium this year a few times. And I actually think that I know this is not a livery episode, but I think the V-Carbs are the best looking car of all the cars this year.
1,000% agree.
Yep.
By a mile.
They kind of took that Red Bull Japan special livery and made it like better somehow. So
I think it's a little on the nose because it was the livery for Japan and RB's lead driver is Japanese, but why not lean into it? Listener, this has been on the backdrop of SNL's 50th anniversary this entire month. And one of my favorite sketches of recent SNL lore was What's That Name? Where you have to name somebody. So for 5 million Rohit bucks, Daniel Retiredo, see, I mispronounced it because I'm still in Guan Yu Zhou form. Todd, what is RB's second driver's name?
Isaac Hadjar.
Hadjar is how I'm going to pronounce it. Hadjar. He had a glass, but then he decided... Hadjar.
Yeah.
Hadjar. Is this man going to be Nicholas Latifi? Is he going to be Nikita Mazepin? Or will he be actually decent at his role?
No, I think he's what, runner-up in F2? He's a decent driver. I don't think he's going to light the world on fire. I think he'll be stiff competition for Yuki, but I think just with Yuki's experience, especially in the team, he'll get the better of them. The car so far in practice, or in testing, I should say, looks like it's a bit of a handful, so it could be a situation where they've taken a step back this year. Again, I feel like I really don't understand the point of this team if they're supposed to be the junior team building into getting a Red Bull seat, but that car is just struggling. It's like riding the struggle bus every year. I don't really understand the point of it. But I think over the course of the year, Yuki ends up on top, and they're looking at like a not that kind of on top. Probably a 7th, 8th kind of finishing position.
I mean, I appreciate your confidence in Isaac, but let's be real. Yuki is his own competition. Like, he is in competition with himself and nobody else when he's out there. Like, if the temp gauge internally for Yuki gets above like a 7, that basically means there's no shot of a podium. If he can keep it between a 5 and a 7, he's competitive, and almost any car he can figure out a way around it, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's true. His own worst enemy is himself, for sure.
Yeah, he's very lit in that regard. All right, moving on to Yuki Tsunoda's best friend on the grid, and that's Pierre Gasly. And Pierre Gasly, along with Jack Doohan, make up the Alpine team. And Alpine was one of those ones where I think going into last season, there was always that middle-class ambition for them, but they had a stinker for the first half of the year. They were probably the worst car on the grid. They were not performing. And then somewhere around the midseason point, things started to look up. Now, the question is, with Esteban Ocon leaving, this is Pierre Gasly's team. And it was essentially Pierre Gasly's team last year as well, because he did score more points than Esteban. What do you guys make of this new Alpine team? Because this is also the team of the new favorite villain of all of us, which is the aforementioned Flavio Briatore. Can you guys first give a quick 30-second overview of who is Flavio Briatore and why am I mispronouncing his name? And then more importantly, what is he going to bring to Alpine? Because it seems like it's more of an ambassador type hire, but prove me wrong, guys.
I mean,
Nick,
I can jump in on the...
Yeah, you give the Flavio rundown.
So Flavio's basically responsible for Formula One. I think he's owned licensing or something for Formula One racing for probably 40 or plus years, 40, 50 years. And he's also notorious for, he ran United Colors of Benetton, the, fashion brand for years. But he's been busted for so many, financial crimes over the last 40 years that, he makes our president look like a saint. So he's kind of like I said in the group chat, like he's like the original like copper coated con man. He's basically like, sleeps on a beach until he's nice, crispy, and bacon like, and then goes and screws people over. But Formula One fans have benefited from that for the last, 30 years because he's dumped all of his, let's say winnings or earnings into this sport. So he's also like super notorious for being like just like aggressively, in the details with everything. I think there's a quote in that trailer for the Netflix where it's like I think he's talking to Doohan actually, where he says every millimeter that you make, like I'll be watching.
I thought he was talking
I'm
about
going to manage you by every millimeter.
I forget
Guys,
who he's
I
talking
thought
to.
it was completely like I own every millimeter of you, and I'm like, that's a take. That's a way to endear yourself.
I think that's actually how it is being said. I think like they have to play it down because if you really embrace a villain like that so closely, then there's a lot of gray areas in Formula One, so we'll leave it at that.
Turns out he's trafficking Jack Doohan in Formula One.
Yeah, I don't want any of us getting axed for talking about him too much longer. We might have to edit this part out.
Now, there's a certain bat signal that has gone up, and now Flavio is going to be all over the Exhaust Notes podcast. And for all we know, we could convince him to subscribe to our many hypothetical OnlyFans that we've come up with over the years. So that's a win in its own right.
He's got a lot of money to drop. I'm actually a little bit... I feel like he was the villain, and now that he's just like... He's somehow weaseled his way back into like some kind of marketing-facing managerial role within Alpine. That isn't... He's not... He doesn't have the same teeth that he used to, especially after the last scandal with the whole... What is it? Nissan, Renault, Carlos... Is it Carlos Beltran?
The baseball player?
No. You know what I'm talking about, right? The old head of Nissan.
Oh.
He was... what's the hell's his name?
Yeah.
The guy that like got in trouble for essentially fraud at Nissan Renault. And he basically was in bed with Flavio. I just feel like he's kind of a villain, like a villain poster boy now, but with no real teeth into anything.
Now that I think about that, I mixed him up because he's not the one that owns the rights to Formula One. That's Bernie Ecclestone.
That was
right?
Bernie.
Like he's
He's
so Bernie
Nazi.
owns Formula One. Yeah, exactly.
Allegedly.
No.
But yeah, like Flavio's kind of claim to infamy was I forget, it was Renault and like crashing, like there was like intentional crashes were like a thing that he was regularly doing, and then they finally came out and like essentially like I have to look it up real quick. Hold on. I'm pretty sure there was like a whole like thing
he's definitely involved in Crashgate with
Crash. Yeah. That's what I'm thinking.
Oh God, who's suing Formula One right now because of that?
Because that's Fernando, right?
Massa?
That was with Fernando back in the day, right? So
yes.
It's kind of like you're bringing these two villains back together, and like what's going to happen, even though we've come to love Fernando over the years.
Listener, what I will say is this. As we were chatting about this gave me an idea that we're going to have Todd Yates present his top 5 favorite Formula One villains as a future episode. And so, Todd, be ready for that, because I think you were born to do that show.
Formula One villains.
Like
that would be a fun idea.
Yeah. Well.
Oh, wait, current grid?
Yeah, on the current grid. But we could also
we gotta go. I mean, if you can't include Bernie.
Here's the thing, Todd, this is what we call a twofer, because we'll do the current grid, and then when we're struggling for content in the off-season or the mid-season break, that's when it's your time to shine.
We do the all-time? Yeah.
Speaking of all-time, we've got probably 2 of the most all-time pedestrian teams left on the grid, so I'll ask you, where do you guys want to go next, Haas or Stake?
Let's go Stake, because Matteo Binotto's there, and that makes it interesting, at least for
all right,
comic relief.
Talk me up about Stake's chances this year. Or
that's all I have to say about it, to be honest. Like, it's just Matteo Binotto's.
That's exactly what I was going to do. Talk to me in 2026. This is going to be the biggest... like, they were already the slowest team last year. They are going to... I actually feel bad for Hulk. The other kid, the rookie, is cool. Like, he's in Formula One. He gets to drive. He gets the experience. All good for him.
What's his name?
Bortoletto? Bortoletto?
Yes, that is correct.
I think everything's good for him. He's going to trundle around in 18th, 19th, 20th, get the experience, potentially, maybe get like an 11th. But they're going to be the worst team by far. The car looks bad by all accounts. The delivery's somehow not as bad this year, even though it's more green, if that makes sense.
Very sustainable.
But it's 100% a write-off year for them. They are preparing for Audi in 26. They're not going to do shit.
So I guess let me ask you this. One of the more I wouldn't say intriguing subplots because nothing about this team is intriguing, as my two co-hosts have led you to believe. How far, or rather, what is the highest placement that Nico will get this year on the grid? Because, listener, he's probably the most famous person to never podium in Formula One, at least in its current iteration.
Yeah, somehow he'll end up with like an 8th finish or a 7th finish, and it'll be some weird... It'll be rain, or it'll be like some crazy crash that takes out 5 drivers or something.
I was just thinking of Bottas in Hungary.
Yeah,
where he took out like half the grid. And...
Yep.
Yeah, it'll be something like that.
That's my prediction for Nico.
Perfect.
Yeah, I agree.
So 8th. Listener, here's hoping. Here's hoping he can prove us wrong and get that 3rd, but I think I'm going to say 12th. I think he's going to get no higher than 12th this year.
All right.
I'm a hater. But you know what? I am a lover when it comes to this last team because my dear, beloved, bestie, SD Ocon is on this team. And that team, of course, is Haas, USA's own Haas. And they've also got some sort of weird hybrid bear man on the team this year. I don't know about that. Todd, talk to me about this team.
Man, bear, pig. Again, I think they're going to be lower midfield. I think the SD Bestie, your
my beloved,
yes, your beloved. It will probably be like all reliable, and then Behrman, I think, is actually a solid driver. He did really well in his 2 stints with Ferrari, even got points, on his first race. I think he'll be okay. I think, again, it's not going to be anything spectacular, although the one caveat to that is if Ollie Behrman is doing good this year, we might see some sparks between him and SD Bestie because he's notorious for crashing into his teammates. So maybe we'll see some sparks there. That could be interesting.
So I think that actually the more interesting thing about the Haas team this year, I don't really have anything invested in either of the drivers, but I think that their partnership with Toyota Gazoo Racing, which is like in the sports car world, they're I wouldn't say a completely dominant team, but they have had, years of dominance. And I think they're definitely like, the team to beat most seasons, which is interesting because I don't know what the partnership entails, but like supposedly it was more technical than just an advertising deal. It's just interesting to watch, especially as like you kind of think of like the future of Formula One. Like if Toyota has this, like Toyota Gazoo Racing is basically like the GR that you see on like the GR86 and some of these street cars. So there's like direct impact on sales for a lot of those cars when they win at Le Mans or someplace like that. Not to say that it's, all direct sales come from that, but like there's huge impact from their success on the racetrack, which is kind of like old school way of thinking of like race on Sunday, win on Sunday, sell on Monday mentality. But like to me, that really is like a foot in the door into Formula One, and I could see Toyota being, back on the grid as a manufacturer in the next 5 or 10 years based on this partnership. So if it goes well, there's huge opportunity for that to happen, which would be make the sport more interesting to have another engine manufacturer out there.
I just want everybody to play nice, and that means you, Bear Man. Don't ruin SD's chance at getting another podium this year. Because, listeners, one of our favorite episodes to record is the Hot Takes with Cool Dudes, which will be coming to a podcast feed near you. And I think I'm leaning towards SD Bessie getting another podium this year. But like all good hot takes, it needs to bake a little bit more in the oven before I can bring it out and share with the world. But I will use this opportunity to say, guys, we're at about an hour, so let's just cut it here. Any last prevailing thoughts on the start of the Formula One season as we get started into what will hopefully be an eventful, intriguing, informational, all those words that we talk about? Like, what are you... In fact, let me end it this way, because, I tend to ramble. Give me your prediction for who wins the drivers and who wins the constructors.
You go first, Todd. It's too much pressure.
McLaren.
And Lando, I'm assuming.
Oh, actually, I don't know. 60-40 Lando right now. I think Oscar's going to have a really good year. I think he's going to do his thing he's... I feel like he's a bit of a Carlos Sainz where he's very consistent and he's may not have the peaks. Like we always compared Carlos Sainz to Chuck and say like he's the more consistent driver, may not have the peaks and valleys that Chuck does, but is there consistently. And I think that's the kind of thing that wins drivers' championships. So I would say 60-40 Lando, but I would not be surprised if Oscar's in the hunt.
Well, it's better to be a bit of a Carlos Sainz than to be a bit of a helmet. So I'm going to go McLaren and Lando as well. This might be a little bit of wishful thinking, but I really think that they're kind of coming into their own. And it's either the start of a dominant run or Lewis Hamilton's going to spoil it for everyone.
I see. That's kind of how I'm leaning. I'm going to go with the 13th time where we will have a different driver and a constructor win, where I think Max will get number 5, is it? Which is kind of absurd to say out loud because it just feels like one big season. But Ferrari will win their constructors that they've been desperately gunning for the last, what feels like 5 years as well. So listeners, let us know what your thoughts are. Please write us a review on your favorite podcasting medium. Nick, where can they follow you?
At Nick Engvall everywhere. Spending most of my time on Blue Sky nowadays and YouTube.
Toddsy?
You find me in the streets. That's where it is.
Really?
I mean, like, I don't really do the social media thing. I've been kind of not doing that for a while. But, most importantly, find me in the Discord. Come scream into the void about Formula One and shoes and hats and any other things that we talk about in there. That's the most important place to be.
You can find me on OnlyFans at the Sri Lankan sheet collar. No, that doesn't make sense. Listener, it's preseason for this. We're going to come up with better ones.
Remember how I said in the pre-show you should have a business coming up with OnlyFans names? Maybe.
Yes.
Cut down on it. Like that.
Yeah.
I feel like that was me going into Shark Tank and being like, Sharks, I want $5 million for 1% of my company. Like, that's how that was. But here's the thing. If you set the bar very low in the first episode, you can only go up. And that's what we're going to do. So with that, we thank you, listeners, for your patronage, and we will see you soon.
Peace.